Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the absolute most fascinating historical blind spots of early medieval Europe. We're going to unpack how one enigmatic, often totally forgotten tribe fundamentally shaped the early history, culture, and even the genetics of England. It's a massive story. We're talking sweeping mass migrations, dark ancient rituals, and an intense cultural transformation that changed an entire island forever.
Now, when we talk about the post-Roman history of Britain, you almost certainly know the term Anglo-Saxons. I mean, it is deeply baked into our historical vocabulary, right? But using that term actually leaves out a huge piece of the puzzle. We're going to investigate the historical mystery of the legendary Third Tribe, the people who arrived right alongside the Angles and the Saxons, but somehow always get left out of the headline.
Okay, let's dive right into this. The earliest and honestly most crucial written record we have comes from an 8th century Northumbrian cleric known as Bede. In his work from 731 AD, he literally spells it out for us. He explicitly recorded that the Germanic settlers of Britain came from 3 distinct, highly powerful tribes. He lists the Saxons, the Angles, and finally, the Jutes. So if Bede recorded them as foundational settlers right from the start, why are they so incredibly elusive to us today?
Section 1. The elusive Third Tribe and their continental clues.
Well, when you compare the early classical mentions, it becomes brilliantly clear why the Jutes were initially overshadowed. See, Roman writers definitely noticed the Saxons, mostly because they were active maritime raiders causing headaches for the Roman Empire. The Angles get a clear shout-out by the historian Tacitus, but the Jutes? Tacitus calls them the Eudoses, Ptolemy maybe labels them the Faradini, and most often, Roman chroniclers just lazily lump them under the generic Saxon umbrella. To a Roman, Saxon often just meant any raider sailing down from the North Sea, which completely obscured the unique identity of the Jutes. So, where did they come from? Long before crossing the sea to Britain, the Jutes inhabited the Jutland Peninsula, which is modern-day Denmark. Historically speaking, they essentially filled a regional vacuum left behind by earlier tribes, like the Cimbri and Teutonis, who had already migrated south. Culturally, the Jutes were part of a broad alliance of tribes known as the Suebic Confederacy. This meant they shared distinct cultural markers with their neighbors. Actually, they even shared a very specific, kind of wild hairstyle, known as the Swabian knot.
Section 2. Origins and the Nerthus cult.
What's really fascinating about early Jutish society is just how strictly stratified it was. As part of that broader North Sea tribal zone, their society was rigidly carved into specific castes. You had the nobles, or ebhilingui, the freemen, known as frillingi, and the half-freemen, or lazi. And to lock this structure in place, intermarriage between these castes was strictly prohibited by customary law. Marrying outside of your designated caste wasn't just frowned upon, it carried severe and sometimes literally fatal penalties. Their religious life was equally intense, for sure. The Jutes, right alongside their neighbors the Angles, were deeply involved in something called the Nerthus cult. This was a highly localized Germanic pagan practice focused on the earth goddess Nerthus. Ancient sources tell us about these rituals taking place in a sacred, unnamed island grove, and yes, they famously involved ritualistic human sacrifice. Astoundingly, modern archaeology backs us up perfectly. We found numerous Iron Age bog bodies in this exact region, with many showing clear signs of ritual execution directly linked to these ancient practices.
Section 3. Migration to Britannia.
For the longest time, the dominant historical myth was that the migration to Britain was basically just small bands of elite, rowdy male warriors pulling off a hostile military takeover. But recent historical and archaeological research paints a completely different picture. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't a military raid at all. It was a massive demographic movement. We are talking about entire families, men and women in equal numbers, packing up and settling permanently. And a huge push factor for this mass migration, severe environmental instability. Rising sea levels and coastal flooding in their low-lying homelands literally forced them out to seek higher, safer ground over in Britain. Looking at the timeline, it's quite a journey. Back in the 1st century, they're just those obscure Eudoses mentioned by Tacitus. But by the mid-5th century, the legend goes that 2 Jutish brothers, Hengist and Horsa, were actually invited over to Britain by a Briton king named Vortigern. They were supposed to serve as mercenaries, but they arrived, dug in, fortified their positions, and ultimately turned the tables to establish the Kingdom of Kent. Fast forward to 597 AD, and this specific Jutish kingdom becomes the exact landing spot for the Gregorian mission, the very mission that reintroduced Christianity to the island.
To really wrap your head around just how massive this migration was, consider this staggering figure: 76%. Landmark archaeogenetic data published in 2022 proves that up to 76% of the early medieval gene pool in eastern and southern England came directly from these continental northern European immigrants. That completely shatters the old idea of a tiny military elite taking over. The Jutes, Angles, and Saxons showed up in huge numbers and forever altered the island's demographics. Section 4. Settling Kent and beyond.
So here is the crucial point. Despite being a demographic minority compared to the much larger Angles and Saxons, the Jutes were incredibly smart about where they put down roots. They secured highly strategic and fabulously wealthy coastal territories. They established the powerful Kingdom of Kent, and, fun fact, they actually kept the name of the native Celtic Kentiacia tribe for that region. They also settled the Isle of Wight, the coastal parts of Hampshire, and there's really strong evidence they formed a Hastings tribe in Sussex. By locking down these locations, they controlled the absolute best coastal access back to the European continent.
Now, as they settled in, they obviously had to navigate relations with the native populations. The incoming Germanic tribes used the Old English term Walos to describe the indigenous Celtic Britons. This derives from a much older Proto-Germanic word, walla, which just meant foreigner or stranger. It's kind of ironic, right? The Jutes and Saxons were the actual newcomers who just crossed the sea, yet they labeled the native locals as the strangers. And over time, this specific word, Walos, evolved directly into the modern word we still use today, Welsh. Unfortunately, that relationship quickly became incredibly unequal. Historical sources show that the singular term wealth rapidly took on a derogatory meaning in Old English, essentially becoming synonymous with slave or serf. This reflects a very harsh, very real social subordination. The native Celtic Britons faced immense pressure, which led to profound geographic displacement. They were largely pushed westward into the mountains of modern-day Wales and Cornwall, and many even fled all the way across the sea to Brittany. This whole dynamic forced the total fragmentation of the common Brittonic language. Section 5. A distinct cultural legacy. Let's look at their lasting footprint, because even though they were surrounded by Angles and Saxons, the Jutes fiercely maintained a highly distinct material culture. Thanks to their prime coastal real estate in Kent, they built incredibly strong trade and marriage links with the Merovingian Franks just across the English Channel. If you look at archaeological digs in Jutish areas, you find totally distinctive art, highly specific jewelry like these unique brooches, and entirely different dress styles. They even kept their own unique legal inheritance traditions and specialized land measurement systems that their neighbors simply didn't use. And this distinct identity had an absolutely outsized impact on world history. Because of their coastal dominance and those tight political connections with the Christian Franks, the Jutish Kingdom of Kent served as the primary conduit for reintroducing Roman Christianity to Britain in 597 AD. The Gregorian mission literally landed right on Jutish beaches. Without the strategic, wealthy, and well-connected Jutes, the entire religious and political transformation of early medieval England would have looked entirely different. Which leaves us with this final thought for you to chew on. If the Jutes established Britain's most powerful early kingdom, maintained highly unique cultural traditions, and essentially sparked the island's massive religious transformation, why on earth do we still only call it Anglo-Saxon history? It's a fantastic reminder that history often oversimplifies complex stories, and that by looking just a little bit closer, we can rediscover the elusive third tribe that helped build a nation. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this sparks your curiosity to keep digging in the past.